Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk a little bit about reading speeds and ponder the question of whether I read too fast. So this video is in response to 3 videos on the subject of reading speeds. One which went up a few months ago, a couple of which are more recent, but all of which are really, really interesting. So I will link to all 3 of those videos in the description for this one, but I also want to talk a little bit about them in my introduction before I get into talking about my personal thoughts about reading speeds and my own reading speed as well. And it's also in response to some comments I've had on videos recently where people have questioned whether I read too quickly. So I will get into all of that in a moment, but first let's just talk about those 3 videos. So I'll talk about them in the order that they were published. So the first one was from Juan at the channel Played by Visions. And he made a video encouraging people, encouraging people not to worry about their reading speeds, but also encouraging people to think about slowing down and to deliberately read more slowly, to immerse themselves in the book they were reading more. And that video was in part in response to a video I'd made about how to read, not necessarily about how to read more quickly, but about how to read more. So I've made a couple of videos. I made one last year, one at the start of this year, about how I read as much as I read. So I do read a lot, and I do read quite quickly, and I think I read quickly because I'm just very used to it. So Juan in his video describes me as a fanatical reader, and that's probably a fair assessment. So I've been reading a lot for decades, so I'm very, very used to reading. But the other thing I do is I maximise the amount of time I've got for reading. So I spend a lot of time reading. It's my main hobby, kind of jointly with making booktube videos. So it takes up, most of my free time when I'm not doing, things with my family and things, that kind of thing. I'm reading or making videos about reading. So I do it a lot. And the videos I've done are not really about speed reading, because I don't consider myself to be a speed reader. They're about how to make the most time for reading in your day. So what Juan's video also talks about is the kind of snake oil selling speed reading videos you see on YouTube, where people, he says, he describes them in his videos as videos about how to read the Bible in one night, things like that, and how you're an idiot if you can't do that. So people who are tapping into people's insecurities about how quickly they read, and trying to compel people to try and push themselves to read as quickly as possible, using the techniques that they talk about in their videos. And Juan's point is a great one, which is basically that's not what reading should be about. Reading should be about enjoying the books you're reading, should be about immersing yourselves in the books you're reading and getting value from the books you're reading, rather than just being able to say that you've read 500 books in a year or whatever. Juan also says that there are some books that it is worth deliberately slowing down for. And that's something I think I don't do. I read everything at roughly the same pace. So that's something for me to reflect on a bit, I think. The second video was from Murphy Napier. So Murphy made a really good video about the concept of deliberately slowing down. And in that video, she talks about 2 different modes of reading that she finds herself falling into. So one is the kind of reading where you really immerse yourself in the book, where it becomes all encompassing for you, and you really get a lot out of it and you take in everything in the book. And the other is something she describes, and I really like this term, as ferocious reading, which is when you're reading a book and you just really want to get through it, either because it's you're completely gripped by it and you just want to know what happens, so maybe something in a very plot driven book, or it's a book that's at a certain point in a series and you're really swept up in that series, or, and this is another example she uses, a book where you really want to talk about it. So other people are talking about this book and you want to have experienced it yourself so you can talk about it as well. And what Murphy says about ferocious reading is that it's you're still reading the book, but you may not be as immersed in it. You don't get that, that same level of immersion, and you may also not get the same level of comprehension of what you're reading because you're rushing through the book to get it finished. And I get that. I completely agree with that. And then the final video was from Rachel at the channel Shades of Orange, which was a reaction to Murphy's video. And I found that what Rachel said in her video really rung true with me in terms of my own experience of reading and reading speeds. So what Rachel talks about, one thing she talks about is the kind of the fact that when you are a booktuber, reading and making videos about reading become really intertwined with each other, and I've certainly found that true for myself. So before doing booktube, I used to do like prose reviews. I used to write reviews for websites and things like that, and sometimes articles. And I found I enjoy the process of booktube a lot more than I enjoyed the process of doing written reviews, and I have a lot more engagement with my audience as well, which is fantastic. But both of those things, make reading slightly different than just reading for pleasure, because sometimes you are reading to, because you've been sent a review copy by a publisher and you feel like you're compelled to read it. And sometimes you're reading to meet a deadline for making a particular video or writing a particular article or what have you. So it changes the way you read slightly. And Rachel talks about that in her video. And again, I completely agree. And I do think it can make your reading a bit unhealthy in some ways, because you're not just reading for the enjoyment of reading, you're reading for another purpose as well. So that again is something definitely for me to think about going forward. And the other thing that Rachel talks about, which didn't necessarily ring true for me, but I can really see it, is that so she has a child who I think is about 4 now, and she talks about how when she was a young mother, she was really worried that she wasn't going to have time for reading. And therefore, when she did have time for reading, she read with a kind of scarcity mindset. So she was just trying to get through books as quickly as possible because she didn't know when she'd next have the opportunity to read. And I do definitely think I read like that sometimes, particularly where, going back to talking about the link between having a channel and reading, where I've got books I need to get through for particular projects and things like that I'm doing. So I think that has, that does sometimes give me that kind of scarcity mindset that makes me want to read more quickly, or to use Murphy's term, to read ferociously. So those are the 3 videos, all excellent, all linked in the description for this one, all worth watching, and all have something slightly different to say. So let me add kind of my take on it and talk about my experience of reading, something that happens to me sometimes when I'm reading, which I think is akin to what Juan and Rachel and Murphy were talking about, but slightly different. And that is, for me, sometimes when I'm reading, I find myself becoming slightly disengaged from the book that I'm reading. When I start a book, I'm always completely engaged, but sometimes at some point during the reading of the book, something slips. It's like the gears, if you can imagine, like the gears of my brain and the gears of the book intermeshing, something starts slipping. And once that starts happening, it's very difficult for me to fully engage with the book again. And I was trying to think about a way to describe this, and I was thinking about the difference between watching a movie in the cinema and watching a movie at home. So when you think about watching a movie in the cinema, we are sold that the cinema is like going to a theatre is the purest way to watch a movie, and I think it is, and partly that's because you've got the big screen and the big sound system and things like that. But many of us have bigger screens and big sound systems in our homes now anyway. But I think what really makes the experience of watching a film in the cinema magical is the fact that you are completely undistracted. So you are completely immersed in the film because you're not at home. When you're watching a movie at home, you might pause it, go and make a cup of tea. I certainly often do that during films. You might get your phone out and start doom scrolling or playing Angry Birds or whatever. You might end up having a conversation with your partner or your family or whatever. There are more things that can distract you from watching the movie than you would have in the cinema. In the cinema, the worst thing is if there's an annoying person, 2 rows behind who starts talking or whatever. But it's a much more immersive experience, and I think that's what we pay for when we go to watch a movie in the theatre. Is we pay to limit the number of distractions, which is funny, isn't it? Because a lot of those distractions are self-made distractions. The distractions when you watch a movie at home are things you could control, but sometimes they can be difficult to control. And I think it's a similar experience for me sometimes when I'm reading. Is I just lose that sense of complete immersion in the book, and things start distracting me. And I think there's possibly a couple of reasons why that is, but I can't really pin down, because when I think about books where that has happened to me, there's not often an obvious difference between books where it hasn't happened to me. And I can think of series where some of the books have completely clicked with me and other ones haven't. So maybe it's something in the book, but maybe it's something about me at the point that I'm reading the book. Either I've got more things on my mind, something's nagging away at the back of me that I need to go and do, and that just distracts me slightly from the book. So if I think about a couple of books I've read recently, so I just finished The Blackboard Jungle by Evan Hunter this morning, and my the gears of my brain and the gears of this book were completely engaged the whole way through. This book gripped me, and I feel like I took in every single word of this book. But during the week I read Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, and that, for whatever reason, at some point I lost that sense of engagement. I had it at the start, but at some point, I think about a third of the way into the book, I just lost that complete engagement with it. And it became not a struggle to read. I still enjoyed it, still took it all in, but I don't feel like I got as much out of it as I would have if I'd been completely engaged with it all the way through. And I certainly didn't get as much out of it as I did out of The Blackboard Jungle. So I think I need to think about how I address that. And part of the problem, to go back to what Rachel was saying, is that when you are reading partly to create content, as well as, so I read for my own pleasure, but I also read to create content. When you're doing that, there are time pressures. I put up 2 review videos a week, which means I need to have finished 2 books a week that I can review. And I do read more than, I normally read more than 2 books a week, normally 4 or 5. But some of those will be books that just don't feel right to review on the channel, or that I don't feel like I've got enough to say about to review on the channel. So there is that pressure of needing to have read a certain amount in order to keep the channel going. So that's something I need to think about. And I think what that does is it sometimes forces me to push on with books even when I've become disengaged from them. And Rachel talks about this in her video about where she's got review copies in particular. She often feels like she needs to keep reading them. She needs to finish them because she feels obliged to the publisher or author who sent her the book to do a review of it. And that's something I definitely feel as well. So I think there's 2 things I should be doing when I realise I've become disengaged from a book and I'm not getting as much out of it as I could be. I think there's 2 possible things I could do. What I do at the moment is I just push on, and I get less out of the second half of the book than I got out of the first half. What I should be doing is either just stopping, just saying this book is not working for me today, and putting it aside, and maybe I'll come back to it in a week and carry on from where I was, and maybe I won't, maybe I'll start it again, whatever. But I should stop reading it. Or the other option is I go back, so I go back 20, 30, 40 pages, whatever, and try and pick up from the last point when I know I was fully engaged with the book, and do it that way. And I think I need to play around and figure out what the right way to do it is. But I think I do need to be strict with myself about when I realise that things aren't quite working for me in the book anymore, thinking about why that is and thinking about what the right approach is. And the right approach is almost certainly not just to carry on reading the book, which is what I often do at the moment. But the risk with that for me as a creator is that it may mean that I don't read enough to keep creating content every day for the channel. So I may have to cut back on the 2 reviews a week and think about, on either a Wednesday or a Thursday, what could I do instead of a review? So we'll see. So that's definitely something, for me personally to think about. But I'm interested to hear if people out there have that same feeling of you sometimes just lose it with a book. And it's not necessarily because the book is a bad book. It may be because the book is a bad book, but it's not necessarily because of that. Maybe it's just, like I say, you've got something going on in your own head that pulls you out of the book a bit. And what I find is because I don't know if it's because I'm so used to reading, because I'm so practiced at reading, but I can continue reading even when I'm not fully engaged with the book, and still feel like I'm reading. When I'm not as immersed, I'm not getting as much out of it. So I need to look out for the warning signs on that and start taking action. But what I was also reflecting on is, am I reading more slowly when I'm fully immersed in a book than when I have become disengaged from it? And the answer to that is, I don't think I do. I think I read at the same speed regardless. So, the Black Ball Jungle, which, as I say, I was completely gripped by, it's a 370-page book. I started it yesterday morning and I finished it this morning. So I definitely wasn't reading it more slowly than other things. So I don't think it really. I don't think that changes my reading speed. I think I read everything at the same speed. And Rachel talked about this in her video as well. She really struggles to slow down, and I think I will as well. I don't think I'm not sure I'm capable of reading a book slowly. It's like, people walk at different speeds, don't they? I walk quite quickly. And sometimes, depending on who I'm walking with, I have to very deliberately slow my pace down. And that can be quite difficult to do. It can feel quite unnatural. And I think, I'm the same with reading. I read at the pace I read at. And reading more slowly than that is something that will be difficult for me. And I do wonder if there's different types of text I could be reading to almost train myself to do that. And I've talked on the channel before about the fact I don't particularly enjoy poetry. And I wonder if that's because poetry is something you have to read slowly, because it's about taking in every single word individually almost, isn't it? And poems are things that you might be reading a book of poetry, you might finish a particular poem in that book and immediately read it again because it's spoken to you in a certain way. And that's not something you really do, or certainly not something I do when I'm reading a novel. So I think, maybe I need to try reading some different things to train myself to read in a different way. But equally, I quite enjoy the way I read, as long as I can deal with this problem of becoming disengaged from books. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the subject of reading speed. Let me know what you think. Let me know, as I say, if you get that feeling sometimes of just disengaging from a book. And let me know what if that is something that's happened to you. Have you been able to do something about it to stop it from happening? Because I'm keen to do that. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves, and this is a book that I definitely became disengaged from, and that is All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. And in this case, I can really pinpoint what it was. There was something about McCarthy's writing style in this book that made it difficult for me to absorb everything that was going on in the book, and as a result I became less and less engaged with the book as I went on. With a lot of books, when I lose that sense of engagement, I stay at the same level of disengagement. But with All the Pretty Horses, I became less and less and less engaged as I went on. Now, subsequently, I've read other Cormac McCarthy books and really enjoyed them. But yeah, All the Pretty Horses, for some reason, there was just something about that book that prevented me from really interlocking with it in a meaningful way. So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments if you feel like you read too quickly sometimes. And do watch those other 3 videos. As I say, they're all really, really excellent. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.